Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, in this video today, we are going to be talking about the gray era of interior design, why it is over, why it was popular, what comes next, what to do if you have sort of a gray home and you're maybe thinking about updating it a little bit. We're just gonna talk about the role of gray in interior design and have a little fun while we're doing it. So let's get to it. And first, let's acknowledge my background is different. Yes, if you have been here before, I have changed my living room. It's a whole process. I'll give you guys the whole story once the place is done. It's all sort of trickling in. I'll give you the full story later, but links are gonna be down in the description as stuff trickles into my living room. If you see things in my background, there you go. Also, my course is live, by the way. Quick shameless plug, head to the description. That's where you can check that out. Let's get to the video. Okay, so let's talk about gray a little bit because I feel like gray nowadays has a really bad reputation in interior design because people talk about sort of how it was so everywhere for several years and people got really sick of it because they felt it was really drab and boring and gray and depressing. And kind of was, and that's what we're going to talk about here, and maybe some ways that you can kind of fix it. But first I want to address the good qualities of gray and why it was so popular. I think the thing is with those sort of cooler gray tones is that they feel really sophisticated, they feel really chic, and I think a lot of people like that. Now they do feel a little bit cold and they can feel a bit standoffish and a little bit kind of give you that art gallery effect, which is again why I think we're moving away from it. But I do think it's really popular for those reasons. It's really good at establishing a very sort of chic, sophisticated mood for a space, and I think that was really popular for a while as well. It was also sort of fit really well, I think, into styles that were really popular sort of in 2015 to 2019 sort of thing, right? So modern farmhouse, glam, transitional spaces. I saw a lot of those spaces as being really popular and a lot of people really loved those styles, and gray works really well in those styles, especially those sort of cooler tone grays, those sort of silvery blue grays, really popular with those styles. And because those styles were popular, so was gray as the neutral of choice. Now I want to establish here that gray is really just a neutral, and I want to really break down a little bit using the old color wheel to explain sort of where gray sort of fits in all this conversation, because people have a distinct idea on what gray is. So first of all, let's talk about, which I've mentioned before, I have a whole video on it, I'm going to link over here, wherever it is, called Tints, Tones, and Shades. We're going to talk about the tints, tones, and shades of different colors, because I think it's really helpful in understanding neutrals and the role of neutrals in design. So when you take a color or a primary hue, could be red, whatever, blue, green, what have you, and you add a lot of white to it, it becomes a tint. It's basically becomes really light, and if you actually add a lot of white to it, it can basically feel like an off-white or a white with a red, yellow, green, whatever sort of undertone to it. Shade is the opposite, but we're adding black, so now it's going to be a darker shade of a certain color. So picture something like blue can feel really bright and vibrant, but when you add a lot of black to it, start to read a little bit more like navy, right? And then you have gray, which gray is just a mix of black and white, and when you add black and white, gray to a primary hue, it just sort of becomes really desaturated. And now adding different combinations of black, white, and gray to different colors opens up the entire color wheel to all of its splendor and all of its different options that you have. So why do I mention that in the context of gray? Because gray, when you add a lot of gray to a certain color, it starts to resemble gray, but just having different undertones. And I think people think gray and they immediately just sort of think of the precise sort of mix of black and white, but actually in design, gray can be mixed with all sorts of different colors, and you can start to get something that resembles gray that maybe has a blue undertone to it. Something like thundercloud gray. You can see here, this is gray, but has a little bit of a bluey sort of tone to it. This is what I think a lot of people think of when they think of gray. This was what was really popular several years back, something like this. And again, I'm gonna use paint colors as an example here by Benjamin Moore, but honestly, you could just apply this to all sorts of different decor and whatever. We're really just talking about the color theory here. Now compare that to something like elephant gray, which is going to be a little bit more violet. It's gonna have a little bit more of those purple undertones, a little bit more red there. It's gonna kind of warm it up a little bit. It's still gray. It's still going to read as gray on your walls to a certain degree, but you can see it has a very different undertone to it. Now take something like gray owl, similar story, except it's gonna have a little bit more of a green undertone to it. And Inukshuk has something of a little bit more of kind of a yellow brown undertone. So you can see it's still under sort of this general umbrella of gray, but it's going to read as very different depending on the undertones that you might have. And of course, if you take gray, but then add more black, you might get something something like gray, or if you add more white, you're gonna get something like classic gray, which is arguably actually more of an off-white. So all this is to say, gray is actually a lot more complex, and it's not inherently a bad color. It's actually a very important color in interior design. I think it was a particular style of gray that was so popular for so many years that kind of had a lot of people feeling like it read as really gray and depressing, especially because it had so much blue added to it. And it was a lot of those blues and silvers with chrome accents and mirrored finishes and rhinestones and glam. And it was all that sort of style of gray that was really popular that I think we have really shifted away from in interior design towards something a little bit newer. So let's talk about what comes next, right? So what has happened in interior design in home decor that has had us all sort of moving away from gray, and where are we going and why are we headed there? Well, first of all, let's just get this out of the way. If you love gray and you still love all these images that I'm showing and your home is gray and you have the gray flooring and you still love it, don't listen to me. I'm just a guy on the internet. Like, this is all for the learning. You don't have to change anything. No one is making you paint your home. You can absolutely do whatever you like here. There is no question here. But you will start to notice that you will see some changes showing up in the different retailers that you might like to shop at, because as they are adjusting to trends and styles, so will the products that are in their showrooms. So something to consider if you see all these new tones that are popping up. That's gonna be why. So where is design headed? Well, for several years now, I think due to the fact that we were all stuck at home for several years, I think that design has really headed into a much warmer direction, and those cooler blue-gray tones have been replaced with something more like beige and cream and moving in that warmer sort of color palette. Now, the neutrals, the true neutrals to me are white, black, and gray, but beige is an interesting one, right? Because it's in wood and it's in, you know, different natural materials, it can sort of read very much like a neutral. So usually in design, we put beiges and creams and things in sort of the neutral category because they typically go with a lot of different things, but actually really it's a subsection of brown, which sits more in kind of the orangey area of the color wheel rather than the black, white, gray, which to me are more sort of true neutrals in that sense. So design trends oftentimes work in a pendulum, and sort of you see this swings, right? We had like, you know, minimalism for a while and then maximalism, and now we're gonna go back to minimalism probably in several years, right? So the same is true for neutrals and paint colors. So gray felt very cold, felt a little bit sophisticated and cool and chic, but it also felt really sort of standoffish. And so this movement towards beige or cream and sort of in this sort of warmer area of the color palette, still gonna feel very neutral, but it's going to feel a lot more friendly and a little bit more homey for people. And that's why we're seeing so much more movement towards these tones. Now, if you have some 90s PTSD of the suffocating all beige bland room, I hear you, I get it, I do as well. I think it's being done in slightly different ways than it was back then. A lot of the paint colors, the sort of backdrop of the space, is gonna lean a lot more kind of like a white or an off-white or maybe even something like a cream. And beige and browns are being sort of brought in more in furniture pieces and decor items. And of course, those gorgeous wood tones and things that we're seeing all over the place. That is just always a natural, timeless material that you're gonna see all the time, because wood naturally leans warm and therefore fits really well into this style. So I would say that the 90s really heavy beige, all beige palette where everything felt really one note is not the direction that it's headed. Instead, working with a lot of those tints, tones, and shades of this sort of beige, cream, brown, chocolate brown, milk chocolate, all that sort of kind of areas of the color wheel. Some tans, but not like an overwhelmingly tan space, which is sort of the direction we had in 1995. And now it's a little bit fresher and a little bit more light and airy because we've got lots of different contrast happening even within beige and cream and brown. It's playing with that contrast of those different areas of brown that I think is really key here to nailing this look, so that you don't get a space that just sort of feels very one note, which was sort of the popular thing that we saw the last time beige was really popular. I think this makes beige feel a lot more sophisticated, and it makes it feel a lot more nuanced, because beige, let's face it, is sort of synonymous with boring. And I understand that, but it doesn't necessarily have to feel that way. I think if you're playing with lots of texture and you are still playing with some contrast, even within sort of the beige area of the color wheel, I think it can feel really fresh and fun at the same time. Maybe not fun, like it's not gonna be like an Art Deco space. You're not gonna get, you know, crazy, necessarily like crazy maximalist spaces, which I know a lot of people are loving right now. But within the neutral realm, if that's what you love about your, you know, in a home, this can feel a little bit more fun than what you're going to get with, obviously compared to those other styles, not so much, but it's gonna feel a little bit warmer and comfortable, which I think is what a lot of people are really looking for in their home. Okay, so now let's talk about for a second here, what if you have a lot of gray elements in your space and you're thinking, well, how can I update with this sort of new warmer direction that is so popular without necessarily ripping out all of that sort of gray engineered hardwood that I put back in 2016 and I'm not really ready to get rid of, nor can I afford to get rid of it. Because let's be honest, if we just sat and it's not practical for most people to chase every single trend, especially when we're talking about fixed elements. When we're talking about flooring, we're talking about tile, it's really difficult to swap those things out for the new trendy color that this guy on YouTube is telling you is a thing, right? Let's be honest, that's not practical. So what do you do if you've got those gray fixed elements and you're looking at warming them up? Well, I would say doing just that, using sort of, yes, you might have those fixed elements in a gray, but playing with that contrast and bringing in some of those warmer woods and creams and browns in things like upholstery, things like, you know, your window treatments, things like your couch, things like wood in your coffee table or inside tables, throws, pillows, all sorts of things like that, I think are really, really a great way to try to warm up a space, and playing with that contrast a little bit. You know, take an interior design style like Japandi. I love that style, and what I think is so interesting about it is it does really play with the contrast between warm and cool. You'll see concrete floors, and then you'll see sort of a wood coffee table over top, and it looks beautiful because it's actually embracing the contrast between the warm and the cool. Still feels very neutral, but sort of has enough textural play and enough contrast to still keep it really fresh and interesting. So other ideas would be things like wicker baskets, you know, wool throws in like a really gorgeous sort of camel color or a warmer beige tone, something like wood accents and things like cutting boards or bowls or things that can really sort of contrast with maybe those cool gray quartz countertops that you have going on, you know? So consider, if you know, you're looking at some of those fixed elements being very, very gray and very cool, consider ways through your decor and furniture that you're able to bring in some of those warmer elements, especially in sort of these natural sort of materials that do such a really great job of warming up your space, even if it leans really cool and you're thinking about playing with something in the warmer area of the color wheel. Also, areas that you might also consider are things like rugs, bringing in those beige, creamy sort of rugs, especially in something like a natural material. Could be something like a wool rug or something like a jute, something like that you're able to warm up some of those floors so they don't read quite as chilly as they necessarily might do right now. That can really work. And also working with lighting that's a little bit warmer in color temperature will also do a really good job of sort of giving a little bit more life to some of those gray walls or sort of gray accent that you have around your home, rather than going for those daylight bulbs or those really white lights that are just really going to make the gray feel even chillier than they already do because they are already in the kind of gray area of the color wheel. So working with something a little bit in a warmer color tone is going to really help warm up some of those pieces. And also one thing you can also do is to play with color. So you don't necessarily just have to go this beige cream direction, although that's kind of the point of this video, but don't forget that you can also of course add color if you want to. So if there are different colors on the warmer side that you're interested, maybe you're interested in playing more with oranges or yellows or reds or purples or something like that, that might be a great way, especially kind of those warmer kind of areas, to sort of warm up the space, make it feel a little bit more comfortable and have a little bit more fun than sort of the drab gray spaces that we have seen in years past. You don't have to go brown or beige. I'm just saying that as far as neutrals go, that is the color direction that design has been headed the last couple of years, and I don't really see that stopping for another several years yet. And also, by the way, don't sleep on texture. I mentioned it with the Japandi style, but adding texture into a space is really going to help it feel a little bit more comfortable. So those mirrored finishes that were really hard and sterile, consider swapping them out. Even if you're not necessarily adding a whole ton of color, consider swapping them out for something that's a little bit more natural and has a little bit more texture to it and maybe breathes a little bit more life into your space than you're gonna get from something like a mirrored finish or a glass coffee table or something like that. So those are my tips. If you have a cool gray space and you're not quite ready to do like a full reno just because it's the new beige, is the new flavor of the moment, things like paint, wood tones, color, texture, all those things can really help a space feel more interesting if you sort of have a gray space and you're thinking about kind of changing it up and making it a little bit more exciting, a little bit more comfortable, even if you're not quite ready to say completely goodbye to gray quite yet. Because you shouldn't, because there's nothing really wrong with gray, like I said before. It's just, you know, how do we find ways to make it a little bit more interesting and a bit more livable for most people? So that's it for me for today, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I will see you all next week. Again, if you'd like to check out my course, check it out down in the description. I have worked on it for more months than I care to admit, and it is now live, so you can go check that out, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks, bye.